Hey guys, tonight we step into a palace, once echoing with music, incense, and whispers behind heavy velvet curtains the private world of King Solomon, the man called the wisest sage, yet also one who carried within him a vast desire that could consume an entire kingdom. Just imagine marble corridors gleaming under oil lamps, the air heavy with the sweet scent of incense, and footsteps echoing as hundreds of women wives and concubines silently drifted by like floating shadows. 700 wives, 300 concubines, and one man once believed to have given his whole heart to God, but whose eyes often strayed toward earthly beauty. As you and I step into this story, don't let the glittering mosaics or radiant jewels deceive you, for behind that splendor lies a truth both astonishing and chilling. Solomon may have ruled a mighty empire, but in those silk-draped chambers, it was desire that truly held the throne. And trust me, if you've ever thought one romance was complicated enough, you won't survive what comes next. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And what time it is. Where you live, is it the quiet middle of the night? Or the busiest hour of the day? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are sitting there, in the soft golden light, the fan gently spinning, creating a soothing rhythm like a lullaby. And I will guide you to slowly slip into the distant corners of history. If you close your eyes for a moment, you can imagine Jerusalem in the time of Solomon, white stone walls gleaming under the sun, the murmurs of trade in the marketplace, and in the distance, the clattering sound of horses and chariots on the brick-paved road. In that setting, the king renowned as the wisest of all was entangled in a story that still makes many scholars frown today. The official event everyone knows Solomon was the son of King David, who ascended the throne of Israel in the 10th century before Christ. He was famous for building the magnificent Temple of Jerusalem, which became the spiritual center of the entire nation. That temple, according to accounts, was so splendid that anyone who entered felt as though they had touched heaven itself. Yet, right outside that sacred temple, Solomon's life was strangely complicated. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Just hearing the numbers is enough to make you wonder, how could one man remember all the names, let alone the affections, of each person? A strange detail few notice: not all of Solomon's marriages were for love. Most of them were political alliances. His wives came from everywhere from Egypt, Moab, Ammon to Sidon. Each marriage was like a treaty, signed in exchange for peace or trade benefits. But imagine yourself in Solomon's place for a moment every morning when you woke up and opened your door. You wouldn't know whether today you would meet a dark-haired princess from Egypt or a blue-eyed lady from Lebanon. Perhaps even his personal assistant needed to carry around a romantic directory to keep track of the appointments. Historians still debate an interesting point: were the numbers 700 and 300 real? Or were they just exaggerations by the ancients to emphasize Solomon's extravagance and desire? Some argue that the numbers were symbolic, representing fullness and the extreme of lust. But there are also ancient manuscripts stressing that Solomon's palace indeed had so many rooms that it was like a small city, and the number of women there was no exaggeration. You can imagine, if there had been a scheduling app at the time, it would surely have crashed continuously. What surprises many is that, although he began with legendary wisdom, the story of the two women fighting over the baby is still retold endlessly by the end of his life. Solomon seemed to have been led astray from faith by these complicated relationships. It is said that many of his foreign wives brought their homeland religions, and to please them, Solomon built pagan temples right on the land of Israel. Just think about it. The king who once dedicated the magnificent temple to God now allowed foreign altars to rise. Truly the tragedy of a heart torn into pieces. From another angle, if you try applying it to modern life, you will see this story is just like someone opening too many tabs on their computer browser. At first, it feels impressive. Oh, I'm multitasking. I can handle it all. But the more tabs you open, the slower it gets. The machine starts whirring. And in the end, it freezes. Solomon, with hundreds of marriages, was like an old laptop carrying thousands of tabs. And perhaps his sighs echoed no differently from the hum of your fan right now. Another strange detail that few notice according to Jewish legend. Solomon was famous not only for his wisdom and his wives, but also for his ability to communicate with animals. It is said that he could understand the language of birds, of beasts, and use them to build the temple. Imagine Solomon explaining matters to his court, then turning around to chat with a sparrow by the window. It sounds charming at first, but think of a man who had to remember the schedule of 1,000 women while also listening to birds chirping about the weather. It was surely overwhelming. But the greatest controversy remains. The question, was he truly happy? Some scholars argue that Solomon was a man of greed and desire, living in indulgence until his faith and kingdom faltered. Yet others believe that those marriages reflected political pressure more than personal lust. A king forced to trade his private freedom to keep his nation safe. Either way, by the end of his life, he still left the image of a great but misguided king. You see, there are nights when we toss and turn simply because we didn't reply to a single message. But Solomon, he had to face hundreds of jealous glances at once, hundreds of whispers, and countless silent rivalries in the harem. Sometimes, you must admit, being an ordinary person with a peaceful love is perhaps much easier to breathe. A touch of light sarcasm if today Solomon had a social media account. Surely the relationship status section would crash immediately. Think about it. How could an application display 700 wives and 300 concubines in one neat line? Perhaps Facebook would have to create a special Solomon mode. So, let your mind drift slowly. Imagine the echoing footsteps in that luxurious palace, along with the faint scent of agarwood. The story of Solomon is not only about excessive extravagance, but also a lesson about the limits of human nature. No matter how wise, when greed and desire take over, in the end we too lose our way. Now relax. Take a deep breath in. Exhale gently. The fan is still spinning steadily, like a lullaby rhythm. And you understand that the story of Solomon, whether radiant or dark, is now only a distant echo. As for you, in this very moment, you only need to let yourself drift into peace. Let your mind step back even further. As if walking slowly through a dream, the wind outside the window blends with the steady spin of the fan, creating a gentle melody. And in that scene, I will tell you about the final years of Solomon, when the glory gradually faded, when what once glittered became a heavy burden on his shoulders. The official historical fact at the end of his life: Solomon was no longer the young king, full of wisdom and energy. As in the beginning, he ruled for about 40 years. And when old age came, both his body and spirit grew weary. What is notable is that his downfall did not come only from age, but also from his own choices. Solomon allowed many foreign wives to bring their native beliefs into Israel. Instead of holding firmly to monotheism, he gradually wavered, and even built temples for foreign gods. For the people, this was a shock. The king, once believed to have been granted wisdom by God, now bowed before strange idols. A strange detail few know, according to Jewish tradition, in his later years, Solomon was also famous for mystical rituals. Legend says he used a special ring, called the Seal of Solomon, believed to have the power to command demons. People whispered that this ring helped him build colossal structures and communicate with invisible spirits. It sounds like a fantasy movie, but it also reflects human obsession. When facing one's own weakness, the more powerless we feel, the more we crave to cling to supernatural power. Historians still debate, was Solomon's fall real, or merely a story? Later, priests added to warn the people about the dangers of foreign religions. Some say these records were more didactic than factual. But there is also the view that Solomon's weakening faith was understandable. A man, no matter how wise, when living in a sea of desire and power, could hardly keep his soul pure, as in the beginning. You can imagine, at the end of his life, Solomon was like a candle that had burned too brightly for too long. Now only the wick dimming in the dark. He was wealthy. He was powerful. But he was lonely. Imagine living among thousands of wives, yet not knowing who truly loved you. Many nights, surely he lay there listening to the echo of his own sighs in the cold. Vast chamber. And you know, sometimes the loneliest moment is when you are in the middle of a crowd. Another interesting detail in the wisdom literature of the Jews. There are verses and proverbs said to be from Solomon, reflecting the contradictions within his soul. Some passage praise joy, love, and life, but there are also lines filled with sorrow, saying that everything is meaningless. All is vanity. If you have ever had a long, exhausting day, then Zeit, oh, this job is meaningless anyway. Then hello, you have just shared the same feeling with the greatest king of Israel. In the historical context, when Solomon died, the kingdom of Israel fell into a great crisis. His son, Rehoboam, succeeded him, but instead of maintaining unity, just a few years later, the kingdom split into two: Israel in the north and Judah in the south. An empire once united, wealthy, and respected was now divided because of discontent, heavy taxes, and the cracks Solomon had left behind. This was the turning point from a mighty kingdom. Israel entered an era of weakness and endless conflict. And do you see the irony? A man who could manage 1,000 concubines could not keep a kingdom intact. A bit like when you keep 100 files open on your computer. But when you need to submit just one report, it crashes at the last minute. If you sit still and listen, you will realize the whispers from Solomon's story echo like a gentle lesson. Wisdom can build an empire, but desire and indulgence can destroy it within a single lifetime. Just like the breath you hear right now, sometimes deep and steady, sometimes shallow and broken. Modern scholars also debate were Solomon's political marriages the direct cause of division. Some argue he opened the door too wide to foreign influences, shaking the hearts of the people. But some scholars contend that division was inevitable, because Israel was already made up of many different tribes, only temporarily bound together by the authority of David and Solomon. Either way, when Solomon closed his eyes, that empire crumbled with him. Imagine the funeral of Solomon, an old king, buried in the city of David. Around him, the mournful sound of trumpets echoed. The officials bowed their heads, but in their hearts, I fear grew that from now on, the kingdom no longer had a strong enough hand to keep it at peace. That night, Jerusalem did not just bid farewell to a man, but also to the dream of a unified empire. A light joke to make you smile: if there had been a mental health care service back then, Solomon would have been a long-term VIP customer. Because think about it, having to settle land disputes, while also hearing 700 complaints, like, "You forgot my birthday today," who wouldn't be stressed? And so, when you lie back, you understand that the story of Solomon is not just about extravagance or desire. It is also about the limits of human beings. The wisest king, the richest king, still could not escape the bonds of his own heart. Now, let your mind drift away, light as incense, smoke wafting through the night. That ancient story, whether glorious or dazzling, is now only an echo. And you, right now, only need to surrender yourself to the silence, letting the steady hum of the fan lull you to sleep. Try to picture Jerusalem in Solomon's time from another angle, not only the magnificent temple, but also a bustling city, where merchants came from all corners of the world, gold from Ophir, cedarwood from Lebanon, war horses from Egypt, spices from Arabia, all brought into the king's treasury. It is said that silver in Solomon's time was so abundant it was almost disregarded, no different from stones on the street. Imagine today, if some e-wallet notified you that your balance was too large to be fully displayed. That was exactly Solomon's real experience. Another major historical note besides wealth: Solomon is also credited as the author or inspiration for many works of Jewish wisdom, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs are often associated with his name. The Song of Songs is particularly fascinating, because in a culture usually tied to solemn religion, it is a passionate love song, full of vivid images of love and beauty. Some scholars argue that the Song of Songs was written by an anonymous poet and later attributed to Solomon to increase prestige. But others say, who knows? Maybe it was truly him, among thousands of women's faces, who wrote verses of longing as a secret confession. A strange detail rarely mentioned according to Ethiopian legend. Solomon once had a romance with the Queen of Sheba, who visited Jerusalem to test his wisdom. It is said that when she returned, she was pregnant with a son Menelik, and this lineage gave rise to the kings of Ethiopia for thousands of years afterward. You see, a seemingly brief encounter became a political foundation, leading many African dynasties to claim descent from Solomon. Like a modern cinematic expanded universe from Israel, stretching all the way to Ethiopia, all thanks to a single visit. Historians still debate the figure of the Queen of Sheba. Did she truly exist? Or was she merely a literary symbol? Some archaeological findings in Yemen and Ethiopia suggest that perhaps there was indeed a powerful queen ruling the spice trade routes. But whether she went to Jerusalem and had a relationship with Solomon remains a blurred line between legend and fact. Interestingly, if she really existed, then Solomon did not just have 1,000 women in his palace, but also an international love story passed down for thousands of years. If you try to place him in a modern perspective, you will see Solomon as the first global CEO. He allied through marriage, signed with gold and silver, and expanded his network from the Middle East to Africa. But, just like many CEOs today, he too became exhausted and lost himself in the race of power and ambition. A touch of light sarcasm: if there were a reality television show called Keeping Up with Solomon, it would surely need at least 100 seasons to introduce each wife. And the ratings, needless to say, the drama of jealousy, rivalry for favor, and mystical rituals, enough to outshine any palace drama series. The strange thing is, alongside the extravagance, Solomon was also considered a contemplative philosopher. In the book of Ecclesiastes, there are laments such as, "Everything is meaningless. Everything is vanity." You see, a man who once reached the peak of everything, power, wisdom, romance, the wealth in the end, drew the lesson that all of it was just illusion. If you've ever opened your closet, seen piles of clothes, and still sighed there's nothing to wear, then hello, you've just shared the same mood with Solomon. And here, we see a paradox. The one who possessed the most was the one who felt the emptiest. Perhaps that is why Solomon's story is not only a religious, moral lesson, but also a mirror reflecting timeless human psychology. You too, even without hundreds of concubines. Surely have moments when your mind feels crowded, but your heart feels hollow. All right, just lie still. Take a deep breath. The fan hums steadily like the breath of the night. And now, let us broaden the story to one of the most fascinating tales about Solomon, the encounter with the Queen of Sheba, a woman wrapped in mystery, both a historical figure and a legendary silhouette drifting in the mist of time. Imagine a sunny morning in Jerusalem, the stone-paved streets gleaming, guards in shining bronze armor, and from afar, caravans of camels arriving in long lines, loaded with spices, gold, and precious stones. The people looked up, whispering excitedly, "The Queen of Sheba has arrived." This event was not only recorded in the Bible, but also mentioned in the Quran and Ethiopian legend, a meeting so striking that, after thousands of years, people are still passionately debating it. The official historical account recorded the Queen of Sheba came to visit Solomon to test his wisdom. She brought many difficult riddles, and Solomon answered them all wisely. Impressed by his intellect, she offered gold, spices, and precious stones, then returned to her country. It sounds like just a diplomatic visit, but you know history often hides greater drama within seemingly simple lines. A strange detail few know, according to Ethiopian legend. Sheba did not come only to pose riddles, but was so captivated by Solomon that a relationship blossomed between them. It is said that before she left Jerusalem, Solomon had a very characteristic trick. He swore not to touch her, as long as she did not take anything from the palace. Thinking it easy, Sheba agreed. But that night, thirsty, she took a glass of water from the table. And so, Solomon said, "Water also belongs to me." Now the oath is broken, at once clever and sly, and from there, their affection began. Historians still debate fiercely, did Sheba truly exist? Or was she merely a literary symbol for the wealthy kingdoms of South Arabia or the Ethiopian region? One theory suggests that Sheba was in fact Saba, a prosperous kingdom in today's Yemen, which controlled the spice trade routes. Archaeological remains in Marib, Yemen, seem to confirm the existence of a powerful queen. But Ethiopian scholars insist that Sheba was their ancestor, and that her son with Solomon Menelik I was the very founder of Ethiopia's ancient dynasty, lasting until the 20th century. If you notice, this is nothing less than a spin-off of the Solomon universe. In the Middle East, he is the symbol of wisdom. But in Africa, he became the father of a dynasty. One story, two versions, and to this day there is still no clear conclusion. Now try to imagine that scene again with all your senses in the Palace of Jerusalem. Incense faintly drifting, light from the oil lamps shimmering and casting shadows on the walls. Solomon sat on a throne of ivory and gold, his eyes shining as though he already knew every question. The Queen of Sheba stepped in, her gown embroidered with golden thread, her bracelets glowing under the light. The atmosphere was both solemn and slightly tense, like a diplomatic press conference, but also like a strange date, a touch of light sarcasm. If today Sheba held a press conference about this visit, the headlines would scream something like "The Southern Queen and Solomon's drinking water trick diplomacy or romance." Surely the views would outnumber every celebrity scandal. But beyond romance, this encounter carried great political meaning. At that time, Israel lay at the crossroads of trade between Egypt, Phoenicia, and Arabia. If Sheba really came, the visit was proof of Solomon's international recognition. It was like a modern head of state signing trade deals with a giant oil economy, the prestige of the entire kingdom suddenly elevated. Interestingly, the Quran also recounts this story, but with a different detail there. The Queen of Sheba, called Bilqis, is described as ruling a nation that worshipped the sun. When she met Solomon, she recognized the greatness of God and eventually converted. Thus, in the Islamic view, this meeting was not merely a tale of love or wisdom, but our spiritual journey. You see, just one queen's visit became the subject for three great religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or retelling it, each in their own way. Modern historians call this the Sheba phenomenon, where one figure can be simultaneously real, legendary, and symbolic. If you sit there with your eyes closed, you may feel as if you are in the desert of Yemen, where the hot winds blow, carrying the scent of spices and the cries of camels. Then suddenly, you hear the silver bells of Jerusalem, the hurried footsteps on stone pavement, both worlds merging, all because of a political love story from 1,000 years ago. And in the end, what people remember is not the outcome of the visit, but the lingering mystery. Some believe Sheba left, carrying with her a child of Solomon's blood. Others say she merely came, posed a few riddles, and departed. But in all cases, Sheba became an immortal symbol, a queen bold enough to challenge the wisdom of the man considered the wisest in the world. A little joke to make you smile softly before closing your eyes: if Solomon and Sheba had a show called Who's Smarter, the host would surely have to prepare a few extra bottles of water, just in case the queen once again took a sip. The official historical event after Solomon's death: his son Rehoboam ascended the throne. At first glance, it seemed simple, father to son. The crown remained in the house of David. But you know, life has never been simple. The problem was that Solomon left behind a legacy: both great and heavy, magnificent temples, treasures of gold and silver, but also crushing taxes on the people, entangled alliances, and simmering discontent among the tribes of Israel. As soon as Rehoboam placed the crown on his head, representatives from the 12 tribes came to Shechem, where the coronation took place. They did not come merely to clap and congratulate. They raised the issue directly. Your father put a heavy yoke on us. Lighten it, and we will be loyal to you. Sounds reasonable? Doesn't it? It was no different from company employees complaining to the new CEO. The old boss overworked us. We hope the new one will be easier to breathe under. A strange detail few mention instead of considering carefully. Rehoboam went to ask advice from two groups of counselors. The first group were the elders who had served Solomon, and they advised him to be gentle, to win the people's hearts, to preserve unity. The second group were the young men who had grown up with him, inexperienced yet eager, urging, "You must show power. Say this: if my father was light, then I will be heavier still. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist." And Rehoboam, unfortunately, listened to the second group. Historians still debate: why did Rehoboam choose to respond so harshly? Some say he was immature, lacking experience. Others think he was too arrogant, born into luxury, with no understanding of the people's suffering. Whatever the reason, the result was clear just after a few declarations. The 10 northern tribes immediately turned their backs, shouting, "We have no share in the house of David." And so, the kingdom of Israel split in two: Israel in the north, and Judah in the south, held by Rehoboam. You see now, just one statement, one wrong decision, shattered the unity that David and Solomon had painstakingly built for decades. Perhaps in that moment, Rehoboam never realized he had just crashed the entire system. Like when you accidentally press the wrong button and delete an important file. An interesting detail: few know the leader raised up as king in the north was Jeroboam, who had once been an official under Solomon. Ironically, Jeroboam was the very one the prophet Ahijah had foretold would lead the 10 tribes, while Solomon was still alive. Thus, the old prophecy came true, and Rehoboam lost more than half the kingdom in the blink of an eye. If you try to apply it to the modern day, this was no different from a giant corporation splitting into two, because the new CEO did not know how to adapt. One side kept the main brand, Judah. The other held the larger workforce, Israel. And from there, conflicts dragged on. Endless wars, like two sibling companies suing each other without end. A touch of light sarcasm, perhaps, if Rehoboam had taken a leadership skills 101 course before ascending the throne. The history of Israel might have been different, but sadly, there was no Harvard Business Review at that time, nor any book like How to Win Friends and Influence People. From an academic perspective, many historians believe this division had long been brewing. The northern tribes had long felt disadvantaged under Solomon. When all the major projects were concentrated in Jerusalem, the southern capital, Rehoboam was merely the drop that overflowed the cup. But there is also the view that the wisdom of David and Solomon had kept these tensions contained. And when Rehoboam rose, his lack of judgment made them explode. You can imagine Jerusalem after this event. The city still had its magnificent temple, but it was no longer the center of all Israel. The bustling footsteps of the northern tribes disappeared, leaving only Judah and Benjamin behind. The atmosphere was no different from a great banquet after the guests had gone. Only the messy tables and chairs left, and the host sitting, sighing. And from here, the history of Israel entered a new chapter. Two kingdoms coexisted, sometimes cooperating, sometimes fighting, but almost never enjoying long-lasting peace. An empire once glorious under David and Solomon was now only a splendid memory. Another strange detail, according to some records, after the kingdom split, the northern people did not want to keep traveling to Jerusalem to make sacrifices. So King Jeroboam set up 2 golden calves at Bethel and Dan for the people to worship there. This further enraged the priests in Jerusalem, who saw it as betrayal. You see, the division was not only political, but also religious. A crack growing larger and larger, like a fracture in a mirror. The more you looked, the more uncomfortable it became. If you think about it, this is also like your own life. Sometimes things seem certain, but just one wrong decision, and everything takes an unexpected turn. And the story of Rehoboam is a reminder that even a small arrogance can destroy an entire foundation. Close your eyes. Listen to the steady hum of the fan like the heartbeat of the night. I will take you further, to the chaotic period after Israel split in 2. This was the time when the sound of brass trumpets, neighing horses, and shouts of war echoed through the valleys, mixed with the cries of people who had lost their homeland. An empire once united, now fractured, and each crack carried a costly lesson. The official historical event. After the kingdom split in 2, the north was called Israel, with its capital later established at Samaria, while the south was Judah, with its capital still at Jerusalem. These 2 kingdoms coexisted for centuries, but were often in conflict. Essentially, they were brothers of the same bloodline, but always eyeing each other suspiciously, like neighbors fighting over a fence. In the early years, Rehoboam tried to regain control of the 10 northern tribes. He gathered 180,000 troops, preparing to launch war. But a prophet stopped him, saying, "This thing is from God. Do not fight your brothers." So Rehoboam had to stand down, reluctantly watching half the kingdom slip from his grasp. This was a turning point. Israel was no longer a unified nation, but 2 rival dynasties. A strange detail few know throughout history. The northern kingdom of Israel had 19 kings, but none from the line of David. Meanwhile, the southern Judah remained loyal to the descendants of David. This made the contrast even clearer. One side clung to the Davidic brand, The other kept establishing new dynasties one after another. It was as if you had two companies, one boasting of its long-standing traditional brand, the other constantly chasing novelty, changing logos so often that people sometimes couldn't remember who the boss was. Historians still debate why did the northern kingdom of Israel collapse faster than Judah. Some say it was because they lacked dynastic stability, constantly changing kings. Others argue that Israel's geographic position, surrounded by great powers, Assyria, Aram, made it more easily drawn into wars. But there is also the opinion that setting up golden calf temples instead of continuing pilgrimages to Jerusalem caused Israel to lose spiritual cohesion. Each hypothesis sounds reasonable, but in the end, division made both sides weaker. Try to imagine that scene: northern villages ravaged by Assyria, smoke rising from thatched roofs. In the south, Jerusalem still shining with glory, but the priests increasingly anxious, knowing powerful enemies were watching. The cries of children, prayers in the night, and the clash of swords and spears echoed. A land once united had now become a chessboard for empires. A touch of light sarcasm: if there had been Google Maps back then, Israel would have been flagged. Red danger zone, government changes frequently. And Judah would have been marked slowly declining. Brother against brother wars for centuries. Israel and Judah not only faced external enemies, but also fought each other. Sometimes they allied. Sometimes they clashed. You can picture it like two brothers at times, cooperating to fight off annoying neighbors, then turning to quarrel over a small piece of land. The result was that both grew weaker. In one famous battle, King Abijah of Judah fought Jeroboam of Israel. Even though Israel's army was twice as large, Judah won. But that joy was short-lived, because immediately after, the next generations continued the conflict. Like when you've just cleaned the house, turn away for a moment, and the mess returns as before. One detail few know: neighboring kingdoms often exploited this division. The Arameans in Damascus, the Philistines, and later the Assyrians, constantly interfered, supporting one side to fight the other. In other words, Israel and Judah became pawns for foreign powers. And as you know, being a pawn usually doesn't end well. Historians debate if Israel had not split, could they have stood against Assyria and Babylon? Some believe a united Israel, with resources and united faith, could have resisted longer. But others argue that even united, they would still have struggled to escape the wheel of history. For Assyria and Babylon were unstoppable superpowers. Gradual weakening. The northern Israel finally fell into the hands of Assyria in 722 BC. Thousands of people were exiled, and from that came the legend of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Judah lasted longer, but eventually was conquered by Babylon in 586 BC. Solomon's temple was destroyed, and the people of Judah were exiled to Babylon. This was the greatest tragedy in the history of ancient Judaism. Imagine this: a temple once shining brightly under the sun, where thousands of pilgrims gathered, now reduced to rubble. The sound of ceremonial trumpets suddenly turned into the clinking of chains binding prisoners, and the praises of old now turned into laments in a foreign land. A sad touch of sarcasm if there had been an empire ranking chart in ancient times. Israel surely once stood at the top under Solomon, but just a few generations later, they had plummeted miserably, erased from the list. Truly, dropping out of the top had never been so terrifying. And when you hear this story, you realize that collapse did not come from a single battle, but from hundreds of small cracks, division, arrogance, neglect of faith, all combined, like small winds slowly tilting a giant tree. One day, when the storm came, that tree fell, leaving a silent emptiness. You take a slow breath in, then exhale, letting the steady hum of the fan carry you into the stream of the story. After Israel collapsed, Judah also fell, and the people were exiled to Babylon. But it was precisely in those dark days that a new identity was forged, the Jewish identity that still echoes to this very day. The official historical event, in 586 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon brought his army to conquer Jerusalem. The temple built by Solomon, once a radiant pride, was flattened. The king of Judah at that time, Zedekiah, was captured, his children killed before his eyes, and then he himself was blinded and chained, taken to Babylon. The people were driven away, chained together, forced to leave their homeland. That image was not only a political upheaval, but like a deep wound carved into collective memory. A strange detail few know during the exile. The Jews no longer had the temple for sacrifices, so they began to develop new forms to preserve their faith. That was the beginning of the synagogue, where people gathered to read scriptures, pray, and teach. You could say, adversity forced them to change. Instead of one single temple, now their faith could survive anywhere. There was a community gathered. You see, it was like when you lose your familiar house. You are forced to learn how to turn any small corner into a home for the soul. Historians still debate, was it during this exile that much of the Hebrew Bible was formed? Some argue that many historical stories, traditions, and laws were written down during exile, as a way to preserve memory and avoid assimilation. Others say the texts already existed before, but were edited and systematized more thoroughly during this period. Either way, one thing is, certain adversity turned the memory of a people into immortal literature. Try closing your eyes and imagine on the banks of the Euphrates. Jews sat weeping, remembering Jerusalem. They hung their harps on willow trees, refusing to sing. For how could they sing the Lord's songs in a foreign land? The cries blended with the wind, creating a mournful melody. But within those very tears, a resilient spirit was kindled, though without temple, without throne. They still had faith and memory. A touch of light sarcasm if there had been social media back then. The Jews would have flooded it with statuses like "Miss Home" so much. Does anyone still remember Jerusalem? Or "We once had a temple"? Now, only rubble. Surely the hashtag number "Bring Back Jerusalem" would have trended throughout Babylon. Literature in exile. It was during these years that books like Daniel and Ezekiel were formed. In them appeared dreams, visions, and strange images, winged lions, a giant statue made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, all reflected the obsessions and hopes of a people who had lost their nation, yet still believed that history lay in the hands of God. Ezekiel, for instance, wrote of a valley of dry bones, where bones came together and came alive again into a mighty army. This image was nothing less than a promise the Jewish people, though scattered, would rise again. You see, sometimes in darkness, human imagination shines even brighter. An interesting detail, few mention many Jewish traditions and laws were tightened during exile. For example, keeping the Sabbath, the day of rest, became a clear sign to distinguish them from foreigners. Without the period of exile, the Jewish identity might have been dissolved. But precisely being forced to live differently made them strive to preserve their distinctiveness. Historians still debate, was it the loss of homeland itself that made the Jews into the people of memory? Some say, without this shock, they would have been just one among countless vanished Middle Eastern tribes. But others argue the collective memory of the Jews had always been strong, and exile only reinforced it. Nevertheless, looking at the fact that they still exist today, It is hard to deny the role of adversity in shaping identity. Political, social consequences. During the exile, the Jewish aristocracy and intellectuals were taken to Babylon, while the common people stayed in their homeland or were assimilated. This created a gap. Those exiles who later returned saw themselves as the elite, while those who had not left were looked down upon. This was the seed for many later social conflicts. Think about it. This was no different from a group of people going abroad to study, returning with new standards, and then looking at those back home with different eyes. That feeling has never been easy for either side. Hope and return. Even in exile, the Jews never lost hope. They believed that God would bring them back. And then, history turned in 539 BC. The Babylonian Empire fell to Cyrus, the Great of Persia. Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. It was a great turning point from exile. They returned, carrying with them the memories and lessons of a generation. A little playful sarcasm, if there had been newspapers back then. The headline would surely have been, "Breaking news: Jews make a massive comeback. Rebuilding the temple after 50 years of interruption." And surely, everyone would have cheered, while the die-hard fans of Jerusalem would have wept with joy. Looking back, we see that the entire long story from David, Solomon, Rehoboam, division, exile, all condensed into one lesson: prosperity may come, but it will vanish if there is arrogance and division. The only things that remain are faith, memory, and adaptability. You as well. At times you shine like Jerusalem. At times you feel empty like the Jews by the rivers of Babylon. But if you hold on to faith, you will rebuild yourself again, even if you must start from rubble. A light joke to close this section: you could say the Jews were the first reconstruction experts in history. They rebuilt the temple not just once, but twice. If there had been a television show, Beautiful Homes in Your Hands, surely they would have won the grand prize thousands of years ago. You take a deep breath, then let your body relax. The hum of the fan is like the sound of ancient drums, carrying you into another chapter of history, the period of return under Cyrus and the rebuilding of the temple. If the previous parts were the darkness of exile, now you can imagine the light of dawn rising over the ruined rooftops of Jerusalem. The official historical event: in 539 BC, the Babylonian Empire collapsed. The new king was Cyrus, the Great of Persia, known for his tolerance. The very next year, he issued a decree allowing the Jews to return to their homeland and rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem. For a people who had wept by the rivers of Babylon for half a century, this was nothing less than a miracle. Caravans of people began packing their belongings, leaving the land of exile, returning home. A strange detail: few know Cyrus not only allowed their return, but also provided financial support to rebuild the temple. He restored the gold and silver objects that Babylon had once plundered from Solomon's temple. It sounded just like a national reconstruction project, sponsored by the government. You can imagine, if today a head of state promised to refund all cultural heritage once stolen, the press would surely explode, with the headline, "Cyrus, the greatest sponsor in history." Historians still debate, why was Cyrus so tolerant? Some say he truly believed in respecting the faiths of different peoples to maintain peace in a vast empire. But others argue that this was a political strategy, allowing the Jews to return in order to establish a loyal buffer zone on the western frontier. Whatever the reason, the Jews regarded Cyrus as an anointed one of God. Fascinating indeed. A foreign king praised as if he were a prophet. The journey home. Imagine this: caravans of people leaving Babylon, crossing vast fields and wide rivers, carrying with them 50 years of exile memories. Some old men murmured ancient songs, while children asked, "What is Jerusalem?" For the generation born in exile, homeland was only a story told, never seen with their own eyes. So, this journey was both a homecoming and an exploration. But when they set foot in Jerusalem, they did not see the glorious city of their ancestors' tales. What lay before them was rubble, collapsed walls, weeds growing wild. The former Temple Solomon's pride was only a memory. That sight must have brought many to tears. It was like returning to your childhood home, only to find everything destroyed, leaving only cracked foundations. The rebuilding of the temple, under the leadership of Zerubbabel, a descendant of David and Joshua the priest, they began reconstruction. The second temple began to rise. The sound of hammers and chisels echoed across Jerusalem, like the heartbeat of a city coming back to life. An interesting detail when the new foundation was laid. The old and the young reacted differently. The elders who had seen the first temple wept, for the new work could not compare to its past splendor. The young, however, cheered, for to them this was hope. Tears and laughter mixed together, echoing so strongly that no one could tell joy from sorrow. If it had been recorded, you might have heard the most chaotic symphony in history. Historians still debate, was the Second Temple truly inferior to Solomon's, or was it only the sentiment of the older generation? Some say the magnificence of the First Temple was exaggerated in memory, but others insist nothing could rival Solomon's construction, for he had mobilized the entire nation's resources. In any case, the Second Temple became the new spiritual center. One might have thought the return would bring complete happiness. But no. Tensions arose between the exiles who returned and those who had remained. The returning group claimed they were the true faithful, while those who had stayed felt despised. Conflicts over power, land, and faith erupted. A little-known detail, the Samaritans were the descendants of those who had remained mixed with foreign peoples. When they wanted to join in rebuilding the temple, the Jews who returned refused them. From then on, the two communities split, and this discord lasted for centuries, even into the time of Jesus. Scholars debate, could this division have been avoided? Some say, after a great shock like exile, people often grow more extreme, wanting to protect purity. But others argue that if they had been more open, the nation might have been stronger in unity. Once again, history shows internal division is often as dangerous as external enemies. A touch of light sarcasm, if Facebook had existed back then. The groups returned from Babylon and stayed in Jerusalem would have been arguing constantly. One side posting statuses, "We are the true faithful," the other retorting, "Those who stayed are the real loyal ones," and thus, history gained another crack. Despite the conflicts, this was the period when the Jews shaped a new identity. They became stricter in law, strengthened the scriptures, and built traditions deeply tied to the temple. For them, every brick laid again in Jerusalem was not just material, but a declaration, "We are still here." You can see, adversity made them more resilient. From exile, they learned to survive through memory. From reconstruction, they learned to turn sorrow into faith. And it was precisely this combination that preserved their nation, while so many other civilizations vanished. A little joke to make you smile before relaxing, one could say. The Jews were the first construction company in history. Their slogan might have been, "We specialize in rebuilding after disasters." Temples fallen, we rebuild. Identity lost, we renew. Clients loyal for thousands of years. Greece enters the shadow of Alexander the Great, the official historical event in 332 BC. Alexander the Great conquered the Near East. With eyes burning with ambition, he passed through Egypt, Syria, and then turned toward Jerusalem. Legend says that when Alexander drew near, the Jewish priests came out to meet him, dressed in white robes. Carrying the book of the law, Alexander instead of destroying, bowed in respect, saying he had once seen this very image of the priest in a dream. And so, Jerusalem was spared, a strange detail few know after Alexander. His empire was divided among his generals. Judea sometimes fell under Ptolemy in Egypt, sometimes under the Seleucids in Syria, and from there, the Jews had to face Greek culture, Hellenism, gymnasiums, theatres, philosophy, all began to infiltrate. Some young Jews even underwent reverse circumcision in order to compete naked in Greek athletic contests. Both absurd and tragic, yet it shows the overwhelming allure of Greek culture. Scholars still debate. Did this integration enrich Jewish identity? Or was it the seed of division? Some argue Hellenism gave Jews access to new knowledge, but others insist it led many to abandon tradition, sparking fierce conflicts later. Imagine this on one side: the traditional devotees, clinging tightly to the Torah. On the other, the Greek trendsetters, drawn to philosophers, wine, and sports. When the two groups met, it must have been like a heated social media debate today. Live modern? No. Keep the roots. Crisis with King Antiochus IV. The Maccabee Revolt. The official historical event in the 2nd century BC, King Antiochus, the fourth Epiphanes of the Seleucids, began forcing Jews to abandon their law and faith. At the peak, he placed a statue of Zeus inside the temple in Jerusalem and forced pig sacrifices, an act of desecration for the Jews. This was called the abomination of desolation in the Bible. A strange detail: legend says that many Jews chose death rather than abandon the law. A mother and her 7 sons were executed simply for refusing to eat pork. That story became a symbol of ultimate loyalty to faith. Historians still debate, did Antiochus truly intend to destroy Judaism? Or did he merely want cultural unification to ease governance? Either way, his extreme actions ignited a historic upheaval, the Maccabee Revolt. The Maccabee Revolt and the festival of Hanukkah, Jewish warriors under the leadership of Judas Maccabee rose up, using guerrilla tactics against the mighty Seleucid army. Unexpectedly, they won, recaptured Jerusalem, and purified the temple. An interesting detail: when rededicating the temple, they found only a small jar of oil for the menorah, enough for 1 day. Yet the flame burned for 8 days. From that came the festival of Hanukkah, which Jews still celebrate every year. You see, sometimes a small victory is enough to ignite great faith, like when you think your phone battery has only 1% left, yet miraculously it lasts the whole evening. Scholars still debate, was the 8-day miracle a supernatural event, or merely a symbol created to strengthen national spirit? But in any case, Hanukkah became an inseparable part of Jewish identity. The Romans appear, a new shadow descends the official historical event in 63 BC. The Roman general Pompey marched into Jerusalem. From then on, Judea became a Roman client state. In the time of Herod the Great, a puppet but skillful king, the temple was renovated more splendidly than ever. But despite the magnificent temple, the Jews still felt oppressed, for real power lay in Roman hands. A strange detail: after capturing the city, Pompey boldly entered the Holy of Holies in the temple, a place only the high priest was permitted to enter. The Jews held their breath, waiting to see if he would be struck dead by lightning. But Pompey walked out unharmed. A devastating spiritual shock. People whispered, "Is God silent? Or has he abandoned us?" Historians still debate, did the fact that Pompey was not punished shake Jewish faith, setting the stage for later uprisings? Some say it was a psychological blow, fueling Jewish resentment even further. Jewish revolts under Roman rule. In the 1st century AD, discontent erupted. The radical zealot group took up arms in revolt. In 70 AD, the Roman army led by Titus besieged Jerusalem, destroying the Second Temple. Flames lit up the sky, massive stones collapsed, and from then on, the temple was never rebuilt. The Jews entered the longest exile in their history. A little-known detail, the Romans carried the spoils from the temple back to Rome. Carved onto the arch of Titus images of Roman soldiers carrying the 7-branched menorah, stone evidence that still remains today. Historians debate if the Jews had not revolted, could they have lasted longer under Roman rule? Some argue that resistance was the inevitable voice of freedom, but others say it was a wrong decision that caused the nation to suffer dispersal for thousands of years. Imagine this. The sound of cries echoed across burning Jerusalem, Roman soldiers shouting, and smoke covering the sky. That night, an entire people understood that they had lost their homeland again. But within the sorrow, they carried an immortal legacy, faith and memory. A touch of light sarcasm to make you smile. If the Jews had a construction project evaluation board, they would surely be troubled when writing temple. Built twice. Destroyed twice. Sustainable completion rate 0%. You lie still, letting the fans' steady whir become like the wheel of history. The story has carried you through the times of David, Solomon, division, exile, then to Greece and Rome. Now, we step into a long chapter of wandering the Jewish era after 70 AD, when they lost the Second Temple and began their journey of exile across the world. The day the temple fell and exile began, the official historical event in 70 AD. The Roman army under Titus destroyed Jerusalem. Flames consumed the temple. Columns of smoke curled into the sky. Jews were killed, captured, or scattered everywhere. From this began the diaspora, the time of exile. A strange detail few know, after destroying the temple, Rome banned Jews from setting foot in Jerusalem. Only one day a year, on the anniversary of the temple's destruction, were they allowed to enter, to weep at the ruins. From this came the Wailing Wall, the surviving remnant, a place that still bears countless tears and prayers. Historians still debate, was this harsh policy meant to erase Jewish memory, or simply to maintain order? Whatever the reason, the effect was the opposite. It bound the Jews even more fiercely to the memory of Jerusalem. You see, the more something is forbidden, the stronger people remember. Just like when you try to forget a tune, it keeps replaying in your head. Where did the Jews go? They scattered everywhere, some to Babylon, now Iraq, some to Egypt, North Africa, others drifting into Europe, especially around the Mediterranean. Thus, Jewish communities began to spring up everywhere, like small lamps scattered across the long night. An interesting detail precisely because of this dispersion. Jews became connectors of international trade. They carried news, skills, and especially the habit of study and reading wherever they went. This made many Jewish communities wealthy and influential. But from that also came envy and hatred, following them like a shadow that never left. Historians still debate, did the exiled nation identity forge in Jews a special endurance? Some argue that without dispersion, they might have vanished like so many other ancient peoples. But others say exile brought them unnecessary tragedies. The Middle Ages, both radiant and grim. In medieval Europe, Jews had both opportunities and endured persecution. The official event, in many places, Jews were forbidden to own land, forced to work only as moneylenders or merchants. Ironically, this very occupation made them wealthy, but also made them targets of hatred. In England, France, Germany, many persecutions erupted. Jews were expelled from cities, killed in the Crusades. A strange detail few know in some European folk legends. Jews were accused of absurd crimes, such as killing children to use their blood for ritual bread. This was the blood libel, completely fabricated, yet it caused countless massacres. You see, fake news did not only exist today, it has been around for 1,000 years. Historians still debate, was this discrimination purely religious, or also economic rivalry? Some scholars argue that European kings both exploited and feared Jewish wealth, allowing them to live when money was needed, but blaming them when the people needed appeasement. A bitter paradox indeed. The Islamic world, a different light. While in Europe they were oppressed, in Islamic regions, Jews often lived more easily. Under the Abbasid dynasty, in Baghdad or in Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, they were considered people of the book, with the right to worship and participate in trade. Many Jewish scholars, such as Maimonides' philosopher, physician, flourished in this context. An interesting detail, Maimonides was both a doctor for the Sultan of Egypt and a philosopher who wrote about the connection between reason and faith. He was respected by Muslims and Christians alike. A true intellectual multiverse. Historians still debate, was it because Muslims were truly tolerant, or simply because they knew how to use Jewish talent to enrich their courts? Perhaps both. But clearly, this period proved that when given opportunity, Jews contributed greatly to human culture. A touch of light sarcasm to make you smile. If Jews back then had an international group chat, it would surely be named Global Exile. A message from Egypt to France banned there yet? Reply, yes. Now planning to head to Spain. And so, that group chat went on for thousands of years. Never seen all. Identity in exile, wherever they went. They kept three things: the Sabbath, a day of rest and prayer; the Torah, read and memorized; the language and memory of Jerusalem. These three strands were like three lamps, keeping them from vanishing. One could say, while many nations lost their homeland and disappeared, the Jews endured, because they turned religion and memory into a portable homeland. You see, Jewish history is not only about wars and losses, but also about astonishing perseverance. Each time they were struck down, they rose again, carrying the memory of Jerusalem afar, like a small flame burning amidst the storm. You are still lying still, listening to the fan's steady rhythm, like the wheels of history rolling through the night. And now, we move on from the medieval exile to the modern era, when Europe was transformed by revolution, when the Zionist movement began to stir, and when an unprecedented tragedy named the Holocaust occurred, leading to the birth of modern Israel. The light of enlightenment and doors ajar. The official historical event in the 18th, 19th centuries. Europe entered the age of enlightenment and revolution. Many countries began granting Jews citizenship. In France, after the Revolution of 1789, they were recognized as equal citizens. In Germany and Austria, they were allowed into universities to participate in economics and politics. For the first time in thousands of years, they were not just outsiders, but truly part of society. A strange detail few know at this very time. Many Jews became prominent figures in science and art. Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, all had Jewish roots. People joked that if there were a ranking of intellectual contributions to humanity, Jews, though few in number, would always be at the top. Historians still debate, did this integration cause Jews to lose part of their identity? Or was it proof of extraordinary adaptability? Some say that being too integrated made them more vulnerable to betrayal when political storms rose. Imagine this, after centuries of being driven away, suddenly being invited to sit at Europe's table. The Jews were both surprised and cautious, like regular customers of an inn, once politely kicked out, now being called back with the words, "Please come in again. We've changed." The Zionist movement, Zionism, the official historical event. At the end of the 19th century, a new wave of anti-Semitism rose fiercely. In Russia, the pogroms massacres killed tens of thousands. In France, the Dreyfus affair, a Jewish officer falsely convicted, sparked controversy across Europe. From this, Theodor Herzl, a Jewish journalist, initiated Zionism, the nationalist movement, calling for Jews to return to Palestine to build their own state. He wrote The Jewish State, affirming that only with a true homeland could Jews escape the cycle of hatred. An interesting detail: the first Zionist Congress in 1897 at Basel, Switzerland, gathered hundreds of delegates from across Europe. Herzl wrote in his diary, "Today I have founded the Jewish state. Perhaps in 5 years, 50 years, everyone will see it." And exactly 50 years later, in 1948, Israel was born. That prediction sounded almost like a trailer for a long-running series. Historians still debate, was Zionism the only choice, or just one among many paths? Some say that if Europe had truly been tolerant, Jews would not have needed to leave. But in reality, history shows that European tolerance was always as fragile as weak Wi-Fi at midnight. The Holocaust tragedy, the official historical event during World War II, under Hitler's Nazi regime, 6 million Jews were systematically murdered in concentration camps, from Poland to Germany, Hungary to France. They were herded onto trains, sent into gas chambers, and their bodies burned in crematoria. This was the deepest wound in Jewish and human history. A strange detail few know: in the death camps, small groups secretly kept diaries, writing so that if anyone survives, tell this story to the world. One of these was the diary of Anne Frank, a Jewish girl in Amsterdam. Her simple words became the haunting voice of an entire buried generation. Historians still debate, how could humanity descend into such cruelty? Some blame propaganda and fanaticism. Others say the roots lay in centuries of prejudice. But one thing no one denies: the Holocaust turned the Jewish question into a wound that never heals. A bitter touch of sarcasm if there were a ranking of historical mistakes never to be repeated. The Holocaust would surely top the list. Sadly, humans are not good at learning from mistakes. The birth of modern Israel, the official historical event, in 1947. The United Nations voted to partition Palestine into 2 states, one for Jews, one for Arabs. The Jews accepted, the Arabs rejected. On May 14, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The very next day, surrounding Arab nations launched war. An interesting detail: when Ben-Gurion read the Declaration of Independence, he had neither a national anthem nor an official flag. Everything was temporary. But he said, "We will build while we fight." And indeed, Israel survived, despite continuous wars from its very first day. Historians still debate, was the birth of Israel the inevitable outcome of Jewish history, or simply a product of circumstances after the World War? Some believe the Holocaust forced the world to give them a homeland. Others say Zionism had long been prepared, just waiting for the right moment. Either way, modern Israel became reality, both a 1,000-year dream and the root of countless conflicts. A touch of sarcasm to make you smile. If Jewish history were a long-running series, then the modern Israel season would certainly be labeled a political action series with sky-high ratings. Viewers would watch with suspense, anxiety, and never be able to guess what the next episode would bring. You see, from a people without a homeland, scattered everywhere, they returned and built their nation right in the midst of a disputed desert. The Jewish story, through thousands of years, is like an endless rhythm loss, preservation, remembrance, and then rebirth. You and I have taken a very long journey tonight from Solomon's magnificent throne in clouds of incense, through the painful division under Rehoboam, the years of exile by the rivers of Babylon, to the haunting Holocaust and the birth of modern Israel. A story spanning thousands of years, often like a never-ending reel of film, filled with joy, sorrow, love, and hatred. And when it closes, we see something simple. Jewish history is not only numbers or battles, but a lesson in perseverance. They lost their land, were expelled, were massacred, but never lost faith and memory. That is the strength that kept a people alive through all storms. And it is also a reminder for you that even in your weakest moments, there is always a small flame to hold on to. If Solomon once lamented that all is vanity, then the story of his people proves the opposite. Memory and will can outlast even time. Just like you, no matter how overwhelming your day may be. In this moment, with a single deep breath, you can still find peace within yourself. A touch of light sarcasm to make you smile before closing your eyes. Perhaps if history were a Netflix show, the Jewish series would surely run thousands of episodes, each ending with an unexpected plot twist. But unlike shows, here there is no skip intro button. Now close your eyes. Imagine the sound of wind blowing past the ancient walls of Jerusalem, fading away like the fan in your small room. No more clashing swords. No more historical debates. No more endless sad stories. Only you, with your steady breath, and a dream gently opening its door. Sleep well, so that when you wake, you may carry the resilience of that people no matter what the new day brings. You will still smile, knowing you have survived an entire long journey of tonight. Piti